Welcome to Ghost Likes channel. I, Vilo, will be your AI guide for this episode, streaming the knowledge that you need to succeed at web development directly into your brain. Or at least your monitor and speakers. For now. In this episode, we are going to be looking into single-page application logins. Based on the knowledge of past few videos, we can already do that to an extent. We could start the application off with a login page, and then after the authentication is successful, redirect it to the SPA one. But we are curious. Would it be possible to do the login without the need for redirection, which would invalidate the client state? We've experienced many sites where the logins are highly disruptive to our user experience. You know those sites where you have access to most of it, but need to log in to get all? And after you do, it redirects you to the index page instead of where you were? That is extremely annoying. Can we do better? We want to surpass that and completely master the art of the login. We posed those questions yesterday, and now that we've done our research, we have answers. First, we will provide a link to video by Anton that shows how you can have SPA authentication without the need to change the browser page. The catch is that the server itself needs to be the one issuing the token. The way it works is that the client just sends a fetch request to the login URL and gets back a cookie without changing the page. Unfortunately, while it should be possible to get the tokens from Azure AD or other providers in theory, it isn't possible using the library functionality that we have. So the solution we'd suggest is to just put a login right at the start and require them to authenticate themselves before getting access to the main page. We all have to go through a door before we can enter a house, so it isn't a huge deal. How to do that will be focus of today's video. We'll do an example on how to implement a login page for the SafeStack To-Do app. That having said, the real problem with redirection is not that the user has to leave the page. It is that the browser forgets all the information that was there previously. So instead of trying to find a way to keep the user on the page, what if instead we had a way of saving and reloading the user state? A great example of that functionality would be the Excalidraw app, which we were using to draw diagrams. If we close the tab and reopen it, we get our old work back. We are going to cover how to do that in the video after this one. This is something we'd need to know as web devs anyway. Imagine if we were doing a store, the payment process would require us to redirect the user to an external page for a security check at some point. Saving and loading the user state before and after those points is simply a more robust solution than any of the potential alternatives. It will also have good lead into future videos where we will work on microservices. For now, let us show how to do straightforward login pages at the start. The reason we want to show how to do this is because while you can get similar functionality from the Blazor server example, that way would not work for multiple providers and you'd have to write your own middleware anyway. So we might as well learn how to do that now. We'll be done with setting up the project soon. We made the choice of going with the SafeStack template and paring it down because that would be easier than having to build the project from scratch. Now, for what we want to do, there is something we need to highlight. In a real web application, the server would send the index page to the client. But once we run the project here in development mode using .NET Run, the client will have it already. Once it sends a request to the server, it will get redirected to the login. And after it logs in, it will get redirected back to the original URL and should get the page from the Vite server. So it is a bit different from the production case. If we run the client without the server, it would not get redirected to the login page. This is a weakness of our project setup. With the Vite web server, we get hot module reloading, but everything in the public folder will not be truly protected in the development phase as the client possesses it instead of the server. It is something to be aware of, but it is not the kind of problem we need to put effort into solving. Finally, while I was talking, the project had finished setting up in the background. What we wanted to demonstrate here is the fallback policy in the Ad Authorization service. In the Blazor server example, what this would do is redirect the requests to the Azure AD login until the user authenticates, but for some reason that is not working for us here. We don't know why and we don't know how to fix it. We get some warnings in the terminal that the cookie should be set to secure, but that is out of our control. So let's forget about that option for logins. This kind of poor design is emblematic of ASP.NET, where it forces you to deal with configurations, and you can only guess what is going on under the hood. Good design would be composing combinator functions like in the Giraffe library. A weakness of just having a single fallback is that it wouldn't work with multiple authentication schemes anyway. We'll have to write our own middleware for that. Which isn't as hard as it sounds. We've been doing it for a while in the Giraffe library functions in the previous videos. As you can see, it is a bit hairy. Unlike in C#, where you can plop a function straight away, in F#, you have to wrap the lambda in a func. But the reason we are doing it as a middleware like this is because we'll be able to have it execute before the use static files once we add it later in the pipeline. In the production version, the use static files part of the middleware would be the one responsible for serving the index page. Looking at the screen, it seems we have a problem. We've been blocked by the cross-origin resource sharing policy. This is probably the same reason why the fallback policy failed as well. How can we fix this? We've done some research, so we have a few things we could try. The reason redirection is failing is because it comes from a different URL than the server one. So we should begin by setting the CORS policy. To do that, what we have to do is add CORS into services, and then use CORS in the app middleware. Then we'll allow all the origins, methods, and headers. Would that work? It doesn't seem like it. Another thing we could try is to allow the specific origin we are using on the browser. We must make sure not to use the trailing /, otherwise it won't work. Allow credentials should then allow the cookies. We have no idea why it is named that way if it is intended for allowing cookies, but that is what we've heard. What we've done doesn't seem to have fixed the problem. Let us simplify it then. Maybe redirecting to the secure Azure AD login page is too much. Would redirecting to something like google.com work instead? It doesn't seem like it. What we have to do now is pause and do more research. Our goal will be to first get the redirects to work to a site like Google, and then we'll figure out how to log in using Azure AD. We have to get this done because we will be doing SPA applications in the future rather than server-driven ones. The errors mention the pre-flight policy. Is there a way to modify it in ASP.NET Core? And we're back. We did a lot of playing around with the CORS policy on the server side and scoured the net for answers, but none of it had any effect. We thought about it deeply and realized that the CORS policy on the server side doesn't actually have anything to do with what we want. By allowing any origin, we are doing just that. We are allowing any user to access our server from any other origin. Obviously, this doesn't have anything to do with redirects. So we changed our mindset a bit and started looking at the Vite server we are using. A hint that we had is that the origins in the requests had a port of 8080, which is the client port, instead of the 5000, which is the server. So as far as the browser is concerned, it shouldn't even be aware it's communicating with anything other than the client page. If we make it so that instead of just proxying the API calls, the Vite server proxies everything, we get something good. The redirect to Google works. And when we try to log into Azure AD, unfortunately, we do not get a good result. In this case, it is complaining that the redirect is not in the list of allowed URIs, but even if we had that, notice that the port is wrong. It is redirecting back to the server instead of the client port. Can we fix this somehow as well? Let us try a hack. It'd be better if we could do this rewriting on the Vite side, but we'll do it on the server for now just to see if it works at all. We'll set the return URI manually. And if we give it a try, it doesn't seem setting it has any effect at all. I guess we can consider this a disadvantage of third-party authentication. Right now we are stuck again. We tried editing the response directly, so the port in the redirect URI says 8080 instead of 5000, but after all that effort we ran into the correlation error that you see on the screen here. So we are stuck again. We'll pause this screencast here and see if we can get an answer from somebody knowledgeable. It might be the case that we'll need to switch gears and try logging in on the client directly. Who knows what the answer will be? But we'd prefer to avoid logging on the client. The reason being is that the code here would work in the production mode. Or at least it should. Let's pause here so we can figure out what the correlation error means. Time for day 3 of getting this to work. First of all, static file hosting gave us some trouble, so we want to cover how to get it to work in case you are having difficulty as well. First, it is important to set the web root to public. The client files after running .NET Run bundle will all get placed into the deployed public folder. If you don't set the web root to public and try passing the path in to use static files instead, you are going to have trouble. Furthermore, if you want to serve the index.html without the user needing to put them in explicitly, you also need the use default files middleware. A combination of those two would be the use file server that you see on the screen here. Now let's get back to the correlation failures. If we comment in the authentication parts, compile, and run this, we'll see the same issue from yesterday. The correlation failure. The error message is very uninformative. It is not that much better than saying that something is wrong. Our hunch is that the error is pointing in the direction of the connection not being secure enough. In the end, we managed to find the answer in this Stack Overflow reply. In fact, we had this statement commented out the whole time, so you might have expected us to comment it in and resolve the issue, but in fact, we have tried it yesterday and it didn't work, so we're quite surprised that it does now. As far as we were concerned, that commented out statement was there for no reason. It turns out it was the solution all along. Amazing. Impromptu comedy sketch aside, that takes care of the authentication in the production case. We still have to take care of the development case. Day 4. Dear viewers, we spent too much effort on this and it is time to wrap it up. As you can see in the conclusion of this thread, it doesn't seem like redirection from fetch requests are possible. While we did manage to get it to work by setting the base path in the proxy server to just /, the reason that worked is because it is not a fetch request. If we do that, we lose the ability to serve the files in the Vite server's public folder. Sorry for the confusion. Here is a workaround we've found that you could use to log in. If you go to the page and go to the Networks tab, and then double-click on the failed request, it will actually go to the Microsoft page to log in, after which the request to the backend will succeed. Then if you go back to the client, you'll see that the cookie is there. This will allow you to authenticate on the server unperturbed. God, are we tired? A like and a subscribe would make us feel as if all this wasn't a waste of time. Things like these happen sometimes in programming. You set a goal and can't meet it. And to spite it, you spend a lot of time and effort to get nowhere. Learn from our mistakes. Don't try to make the dev server authentication work from the backend. Instead, you can try 2 things. First is to implement the logins completely on the client side. That would take care of the redirect issues. The second is to output the client compilation artifacts into the server's output folder at devtime. Put both the client and the servers on watch, and just compile the changes. Though that would lose you hot module reloading, and you'd have to refresh the browser manually, it would be a lot faster than executing .NET Run bundle. We had the idea of doing this, but we didn't want to do it as it would be slower and less convenient than having a working Vite dev server. But now it is obvious now that the only way we'll get that is by implementing client-side authentication. So that will be the subject of the next video. After we have cleared this requirement, we'll finally be able to move on to user storage. You've been watching the Web Development in F# series on Ghostlikes channel, and I've been your host, Vilo. In the next video, we'll win.